So apparently Prince Edward threw Camilla out of Windsor Lodge and handed the entire estate over to his daughter. And there's this image circulating of her nameplate being tossed into a bin at a public ceremony. And the thing I genuinely cannot shake is how not a single person in that room registered what was actually unfolding until the damage was already done. Picture it, a formal Windsor Heritage Memorial event, hundreds of camera shutters clicking, Lady Louise Windsor moving toward her chair in this refined black dress, her hair swept back, just showing up to pay respect to her ancestors and fulfill her role as a granddaughter. And when she's maybe 3 steps from the seating, Queen Camilla's senior courtier steps out in full view, lifts the bronze plate engraved with Lady Louise Windsor right off the chair, and drops it into a wicker wastebasket in the corner. Just drops it. No pause, no hesitation. Then swaps in a plate belonging to someone from Camilla's inner circle. And Louise is standing there watching her own name discarded like refuse, while murmurs start moving through the rows behind her, and the cameras are catching every second of it. And what really gets to me is that she's 20 years old, absorbing this public disgrace completely on her own in that aisle. Then Camilla glides past her, flashing this icy smile for the press, and reportedly leans close and murmurs something to the effect of royal life demanding one know when to withdraw. Which is such a precise variety of cruelty when you sit with it, because it's dressed up as counsel, but underneath, it's a threat disguised as manners. And Louise quietly retreats and absorbs it so the ceremony can continue uninterrupted, which honestly reveals more about who she is than anything else in this whole affair. The thing that lingers in my mind is trying to picture those few seconds through her eyes. You spend your entire life ducking the spotlight, refusing to make yourself the center of anything, never claiming importance, simply appearing when summoned and carrying out your duties with dignity. And then, in front of every person who holds influence in that world, someone quite literally tosses your name into the garbage. That bronze plate must have made a sound when it hit the base of that wicker bin. Maybe dulled, maybe striking against something already inside. But in Louise's memory, it likely rang out like a door being slammed for good. And she just stood there, 20 years old, no mother at her side in that particular instant, no father near enough to step in, only her own poise holding her upright while the message came through with total clarity. You have no place here anymore, and we won't even bother acting like you do. Now, before we go any further, quick reminder, if you're into unpacking royal family drama and the behind-the-scenes power plays that actually shift things, tap that subscribe button for royal exposure. We're going through every layer of this. All right, back into it. So Prince Edward is seated in the row directly opposite, watching this whole scene play out. And this is where the timeline gets really interesting. Edward has always been cast as the soft-spoken one, right? The brother who steers clear of clashes, who chose a quieter life, who never really carved out a position for himself in the palace power games. People have written him off for years. They mistook his calm exterior for softness when in reality it was patience. There's a real gap between someone incapable of fighting and someone who declines to until the moment truly calls for it. But watching his own daughter humiliated in public while Camilla's people commandeer the entire front row of honor, that seems to have been the breaking point. That very night, Edward retreats to his private study inside Windsor Castle and draws up what's now being described as a secretly sealed covenant, which is essentially a binding legal instrument that revokes Queen Camilla's entire residency claim over Windsor Lodge and hands those rights straight to Lady Louise. And the detail that makes this land differently is that he melts red wax and presses his personal signet into the envelope. This isn't some terse email or a firm letter. This is old world royal protocol being turned into a weapon. He's taking the family's own historic legal machinery and aiming it at someone who clearly believed those mechanisms would never touch her. The following morning, King Charles III learns about the covenant, and according to accounts, he just sits motionless, staring at his brother's red wax seal, because he grasps something Camilla apparently never did. The covenant has sealed off every exit. Charles cannot issue any counter decree to undo it or overturn Edward's directive, because doing so would be a direct betrayal of the final wishes left by Queen Elizabeth II. That's the snare Edward set. This was never really about Windsor Lodge as a building. It's about what that building stands for. Camilla has always clung to Windsor Lodge as evidence of her acceptance in the family, her control, her permanence. And Edward has just demonstrated that her permanence was always provisional. He proved that the quiet brother everyone dismissed had been observing the entire time, filing away every procedural regulation, every legal precedent, every mechanism of power he could pull when the moment finally arrived. But this is where the story runs deeper and honestly feels more deliberate than a father simply hitting back after an insult. Edward reportedly spends the next several nights combing through the family's confidential archives after midnight, opening centuries-old oak cabinets by flashlight, hunting for something in particular. And what surfaces is a leather-bound register from 1701, the estate trust papers containing an ironclad clause stating that the property and residency privileges tied to Windsor estates automatically transfer to the children of the direct line if the sitting monarch marries a divorced woman. Now, whether the clause exists in exactly that phrasing or whether it's legally more layered, the essential point stands. Edward uncovered documentation that lent his move historical weight. And directly beneath that ancient clause, there's reportedly a handwritten annotation from Queen Elizabeth II herself, reaffirming that Windsor Lodge should be preserved for service without ambition. Service without ambition. That phrase alone reads as an indictment of everything Camilla appears to have had in motion. Elizabeth II devoted her entire reign to embodying service without ambition. And here was her own handwriting binding that exact ideal to the very property Camilla was attempting to claim for her own purposes. Something must have shifted inside Edward in that moment, standing alone in the archive with a flashlight and a centuries-old volume, realizing his own mother had foreseen precisely this kind of power grab and quietly left instructions to counter it. Because here's what Edward reportedly uncovered next. Inside the current iron safe in the Windsor estate office, there was a thick dossier stamped with the confidential seal of the Queen's office. And inside, a detailed renovation blueprint for Windsor Lodge that had been drawn up months earlier without anyone else in the family being told. The plan outlined converting Windsor Lodge into a permanent legal residence for Tom and Laura, Camilla's children from her prior marriage, along with her grandchildren during major royal occasions. And the specific detail that reportedly turned Edward's blood cold was a section of the blueprint showing Lady Louise's memorial room being demolished to make room for a gaming room for Camilla's children. That's not a property dispute anymore. That's an erasure. Camilla wanted to take a shared family asset and convert it into private territory strictly for her own bloodline, wiping out any trace of anyone who actually carried the Windsor name. And she had been quietly engineering this for months. The gaming room detail is the part that really lodges in my mind because of how casually cruel it is. Not even a room with some practical justification. Not a study, not a library, not something you could defend on any grounds. A gaming room, a space for entertainment built right on top of a room dedicated to honoring a young woman's memory and service. The symbolism is so blunt it almost strains belief. So, when Camilla's network of courtiers picks up on the fact that Edward has been inside both the archives and the estate office, she calls him in for a confrontation at Windsor Lodge. She's seated behind this enormous mahogany desk, twirling the bronze key to the residence between her fingers, and she launches into accusations about him being a traitor to the family, out to stain her honor and stir division within the palace. She threatens to leverage her media influence to isolate Edward's family and push them out of public appearances if he doesn't tear up the covenant. She's convinced this will work because it presumably always has. Edward was the quiet one. He walked away from confrontations. She assumed he would fold. But Edward doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. He simply reaches into the inside of his coat, produces a copy of the renovation plan, tosses it onto the desk right on top of her bronze key, and in this low, controlled voice, walks her through every element on the blueprint. He lays out the territorial takeover, the scheme to convert family holdings into private homes for her children, the erasure of Louise's memorial room. And Camilla's face drains, then flushes crimson, because every one of her private schemes is now sitting exposed on the desk in front of her. Undeniable. The key she'd been spinning as a taunt has just become the evidence sealing her guilt. I keep replaying the sound of that paper landing on the desk, that sharp slap of proof hitting polished mahogany. The key almost certainly stopped turning at that exact instant. Edward didn't need to raise his voice or make any threat. The documents did every ounce of the work. That's the kind of maneuver that only comes from someone who spent years being underestimated, storing up every slight, tracking every detail, biding time until the precise moment when the receipts could be laid out so completely that denial simply wasn't an option. Now, this is where Princess Anne steps into the picture. And if you know anything about Princess Anne, you know she doesn't step into anything without weight behind it. Anne has apparently harbored her own frustration with Camilla's expansionism for a long time. And after witnessing what happened to Louise at the ceremony and receiving Edward's full body of evidence, the 1701 trust document, the renovation plan, everything. She decides to move without calling meetings or consulting courtiers. Anne quietly arrives at the estate office and signs a special confirmation document certifying that Lady Louise fully satisfies every requirement of a loyal patron under the standards Queen Elizabeth II left in place. This is the pincer move, right? Edward's covenant strikes from one side legally. Anne's confirmation strikes from the other through family authority and honor. And Camilla is trapped in between with no direction to move. King Charles III is now sitting in an impossible spot. He's in his private study at Buckingham Palace with his head in his hands, the 1701 Covenant Ledger on one edge of his desk and Anne's confirmation document on the other, his wife on one side, his siblings and his late mother's sacred wishes on the other. Late that night, Camilla storms into his study in tears, screaming, demanding he issue a decree to overturn all of it, strip Louise of the patronage, punish Edward, and Charles has to look his wife in the face and tell her he can do nothing. His authority to shield her in this particular matter has been completely locked down by the strict terms of the 1701 covenant. If he deliberately used his power to shred that covenant just to conceal Camilla's renovation plan, he'd trigger a constitutional crisis and fracture the cohesion of the Windsor family in front of the entire world. The husband who raised her to queen against enormous public backlash is now entirely powerless, forced to stand by and watch justice run its course. Then comes the actual eviction, and the visual detail in the reports plays out almost like a film sequence. 2 in the afternoon, sharp Windsor sunlight, a black car bearing royal insignia rolls onto the grounds. The estate management team steps out, faces set and grave, no smiles, no small talk. The mandate embedded in Edward's covenant activates on the spot. First order of business, dismiss and cancel the staff roster Camilla personally signed off on. Her trusted attendants, the ones who had been striding through the residence like they owned it the day before, are now told they hold no authority to interfere with anything at Windsor Lodge. Her entire privilege to deploy staff is stripped out in an instant. Princess Sophie, Edward's wife and Louise's mother, is watching this entire dismantling from the porch, and the picture of her standing there in her belted wool coat, sorrow visible in her eyes but paired with the calm resolve of a mother who has just secured justice for her daughter, that's the emotional heart of the whole thing. She watches Camilla's courtiers unravel in panic as they realize the control system has been changed, scrambling through rooms, tossing Camilla's private files and belongings into rough cardboard boxes. Then the sun begins slipping behind the ancient trees of Windsor Park. And Camilla's senior courtier, the very same man who personally dropped Louise's bronze nameplate into the bin at the memorial ceremony, is now pale, shoulders sagging, carrying a silver tray toward Princess Sophie. Resting on that tray is the bronze key to the residence, the ultimate token of the possession Camilla had craved, and he's forced to bow as low as he can manage, humiliation etched across his face. Sophie says nothing. She simply lifts the bronze key from the silver tray, the metal catching the fading light. And that soft chime between the key and the platter is the exact sound of Camilla's unlawful hold over Windsor Lodge, finally ending. The Palace Communications Department attempts to release a softening statement that same evening, framing the whole thing as a standard rearrangement of family property. But the next morning, one of the largest newspapers in the UK runs a special edition that blows the entire scandal wide open. The front page is an exclusive close-up of Camilla, head lowered in disgrace, hollow-eyed, rushing into a car as she flees Windsor Lodge. The headline reads, "Edward strips Windsor Lodge from the Queen." The article lays out the secret renovation plan, the plot to seize the residence for her own children and grandchildren, the incident with Louise's nameplate being thrown into the trash. Public outrage catches fire almost immediately, especially among women who saw the injustice inflicted on a young woman simply trying to honor her ancestors. The long avenue leading up to Windsor Castle turns into a sea of people carrying white roses, the symbol of purity, honor, and loyalty. Chanting in solidarity with Lady Louise, they raise banners reading, "The silent ones deserve to inherit too," which might honestly be the most devastating line in this entire situation, because it recasts everything. Louise never chased fame. She never staged herself. She just showed up, carried out her duty, absorbed public humiliation to keep from disturbing a ceremony. And the public witnessed that and decided she deserves more than the ones who constantly demand more. Camilla is now sitting inside an isolated room behind tightly drawn curtains, hiding from the paparazzi lenses, absorbing every single chant from the crowd outside, each shout landing like a public slap. She stares at the front page newspaper, her own humiliated face laid out for the world to whisper about. No machinery of power can rescue her at this point. Public condemnation has turned her into the most reviled figure inside her own family line, and then Lady Louise does something that completely rewrites the entire conflict and honestly makes Camilla's defeat total in a way that petty revenge could never accomplish. Upon receiving the bronze key to the residence from her father, Louise refuses to move into Windsor Lodge. She doesn't parade it as a trophy of victory. She doesn't use it to grind salt into the wounds of the defeated party. Instead, she signs a personal communique to the public announcing a full change in the purpose of Windsor Lodge. From this point forward, the entire estate will serve as a retreat for the children of military families who have served the realm and as the headquarters for carriage-driving charities. She turns royal property into public service. And that single decision boxes Camilla into a position with zero room to fight back, because you can't outbattle someone who isn't fighting you. You can't outmaneuver someone who takes the very prize you were reaching for and simply gives it away to children and veterans and charities. Louise's decision forces Camilla to accept the very boundaries she deliberately crossed, not through force, but through the pure contrast of values. The property Camilla schemed to claim for her private bloodline is now permanently devoted to people she has no tie to, no claim over, no way to influence. Louise didn't just win the confrontation. She made the entire confrontation irrelevant by lifting the prize off the board altogether. On a quiet late afternoon, as the day's last light drains away, Camilla makes a private visit alone, no courtiers, no attendants, back to Windsor Lodge one final time to collect the last of her personal items from her former office. Her face carries no authority now, only deep bitterness. She moves quietly to the empty desk, her trembling hands lifting a sentimental embroidered pen case, her last personal keepsake there, and slips it into a small handbag. Stepping out onto the main porch, she comes face to face with Louise waiting in the shade of the awning. Without a word, without protest, without a sound, Camilla lowers her head, slowly extends her hand, and surrenders the final key of the residence to the young woman. The queen, who had breezed past Louise at the ceremony with a cold remark about knowing when to step back, is now the one stepping back permanently from the very property she tried to steal. And the cold lesson that settles over the House of Windsor after all of it is simple and brutal and probably overdue. The future of this family line will never belong to the greedy ones who constantly demand and seize the most for themselves. It will forever belong to the silent ones prepared to serve. With the fewest expectations, Camilla drags herself off into the shadows of twilight, her lonely silhouette dissolving into the night, leaving Louise standing firm in the light of everything her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, apparently always intended: justice, honor, and the integrity of the House of Windsor, preserved not by the loudest voice in the room, but by the quietest one who never asked for any of it.